Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So we've reached the section of the book where the author, rahimahullaah, speaks about al-Khaas, that which is specific or restricted. And al-Khaas is normally mentioned with al-Am. You'll hear the scholars mentioning al-Am wal-Khaas. Al-Am, we said that it is a pronunciation or a word that covers or encompasses all of the parts that are mentioned and applies to all of them without restriction. And al-Khaas, we're going to see what it means here, what the author is going to tell us. Just as a way of an introduction, so we get an overview of this section, then these are the points that the author is going to mention. Number one, the word Khaas. So the definition of the word Khaas. Then he is going to tell us or speak about the word takhsees. Takhsees. Thirdly, he is going to mention something to do with the word mukhasis. Mukhasis. And then fourthly, he's going to mention that what the evidence is that indicate takhsees, that indicates a restriction or a specification, are of two types. So something which makes the Am Khaas is of two types. You have those which are muttasil, connected, and then you have those which are munfasil, disconnected or detached. Under muttasil, the author is going to mention three types. Number one, he's going to mention istithna, which is in English an exception. Number one, istithna. Number two, shart, a condition, shart. Number three, a sifa, a characteristic. So let's just let's give an example from those. So Am is like if I say give all the students a prize. Give all the students a prize. The fact that I mentioned all, kull or jami' is a form of Am. So this is Am. If we had 10 students in the class, then all of them would receive a prize. Now if I want to specify that, then I could specify it with an exception. I could say give all the students a prize except Zaid. So now I have taken Zaid out of that generality. So all of the students are going to get the prize except for Zaid. So I have taken him out of that generality. Or if I was to do it with a condition, so that was with istithna, with exception. Or if I was to do it with a condition, you could say, for example, give all the students a prize if or give the students a prize if they pass. Give the students a prize if they pass. So now I'm saying I'm adding a condition, if they pass. So now all the students were going to get a prize. but I've now made an exception. Those who do not pass, they will not get the prize. Had I not made that exception, then they would have gotten the prize as well. So it falls under am, but because I made that condition there, that shart, then they did not, or they are excluded. They are excluded from the am. So those are three muttasil: istithna, shart, and sifa. And the other section, or the other type, are the munfasil. The munfasil. And the munfasil, the author mentions three things. Number one, hiss, which is translated as, you could say, the senses. The senses, like your perception, the five senses. What does that mean? That means, for example, that Allah, He gives an example. Allah says in the Quran, تُدَمِّرُ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ بِأَمْرِ رَبِّهَا, that there was a punishment, a wind, that destroyed everything by the command of Allah, of its Lord. But the senses that we have indicate to us that it didn't destroy everything. Now when it says تُدَمِّرُ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ, kull is one of the forms of generality, of am. So it destroyed everything. But the senses, what we can perceive, is that the earth is still here, the skies are still here. So it didn't destroy everything. So that would be specifying something that was left general by way of his perception. Number two of the munfasil is aql, the intellect, specifying something that was general by way of the intellect. The example the author gives is where Allah says, Allahu khaliqu kulli shay. Allah is the creator of everything. Of everything, of all things. So now if we look at the ayah, the word kul, which is everything or every, is an indication, is one of the forms of generality, of am. But we know from our intellect that Allah is, or we know from the intellect that we know that Allah is not created. So they would say that this is a restriction, or a specification. They would say that this is a specification of a generality by way of the intellect. But the author here makes an important point. He says some of the scholars hold the view that what is made specific by the senses, by the hiss or the intellect, is not from the general, is not from the am in the first place, is not from the am that is made specific. Rather, it is from the am which was already intended of being specific. This is a subtle difference. We're going to cover it inshallah when we go through it. But that is an important side point there. And the third thing that can restrict something that is am and that is disconnected, the third is ash-shar'. i.e. the legislation. So for example, you find something am in the Quran or the Sunnah, and it is specified, it is made, some takhsees occurs by the Quran itself, another ayah somewhere in another part of the Quran, another ayah in another part of the Quran, or a hadith may restrict something that is am in another part, in another hadith, another ayah. or an ijma' of the scholars. The scholars may have an agreement upon something which restricts something that was left am, and so forth. We're going to discuss that in more detail. But for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتُ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوءٍ. Divorced women, they remain in a waiting period for three portions of time, for 3 periods. So now Allah has made it am, that any divorced woman, وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتِ, here it's general for any woman that is divorced. What does she do? She waits for 3 waiting periods. But in another ayah, Allah indicates a restriction or a specification. He says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا نَاكَحْتُمُ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ ثُمَّ طَلَّقْتُمُوهُنَّ من قبل أن تمسوهن فما لكم عليهن من عدة تعتدونها O you who have believed, when you marry believing women and then you divorce them before you have touched them, i.e. before you have had intercourse, then there is nothing for you upon them in terms of waiting period that needs to be counted. So in the first ayah, any divorced woman, she has a time that she has to wait, which is 3 periods, 3 periods of time. In the second ayah, Allah brings out of that generality a group of women. He says those women that are divorced but they did not have intercourse, then they don't have a waiting period. So it was, you can see that this was specified and taken out of the general statement. So that's an overview of the Khaas, what the author is going to mention rather in the Khaas. Let's look at here the beginning of this section then. He says تعريفه, أي تعريف al-Khaas. What is the definition of al-Khaas? He says al-Khaas لغة ضد العام. Al-Khaas is linguistically the opposite of am. واصطلاحا, and as a technical terminology, i.e. with the scholars of al-Usuul al-Fiqh, it is al-lafz الدال على محصور بشخص أو عدد كأسماء الأعلام والإشارة والعدد. It is a pronunciation which indicates a specific or which restricts to a specific person or a certain number. So it is a pronunciation which points to something restricted, something that is not general. It is restricted by a person or restricted by a number. For example, al-a'lam, definite names, or al-isharat, like when you say هذا, هذه, and so forth, wal-adad, or the numbers. فخرج بقولنا على محصور العام. So when we mention على محصور, something it points to something restricted, then it excludes for us al-am, because the am is not restricted. So here this is the definition here. Then the second word, so that was the word Khaas. The second word now, takhsees. Takhsees لغة ضد التعميم. It is the opposite of تعميم. واصطلاحا إخراج بعض أفراد العام. It is to take out or to exclude some of the components, some of the parts of an am, of that which is am. like we mentioned in the example, if you have a class of 10 students and you say give the students a prize except those who fail, or if they pass, for example. So you're now, out of those 10 that are going to get prizes, you're going to take out a certain group of them which fall under the am. So at-takhsees lughatan and then istilahan. Then the third word, al-mukhasis wal-mukhasis. Fa'ilu takhsees. Mukhasis is the one who does takhsees. So takhsees, we said, is to exclude something that would otherwise be part of the am, is to exclude something which would otherwise be part of the am. Okay, the mukhasis is the one that does that. Fa'ilu takhsees wa huwa, and he is ash-shari'. But that's number one, is ash-shari'. Number two, وَيُطْلَقُ عَلَى الدَّلِيلِ الَّذِي حَصَلَ بِهِ التَّخْسِيسِ. And sometimes you will say the mukhasis is sometimes used for the evidence that shows this restriction. So you'd say in the two ayat that we mentioned before, you'd say that the second ayah does takhsees, or is the mukhasis for the first ayah, because it specifies it. So it specifies and excludes, takes out some of the divorced women. So the first ayah is general for all the divorced women. The second ayah is the mukhasis, i.e. is the evidence that extracts from that generality a certain group of those divorced women. طيب. والدليل. So now this is al-takhsees and al-mukhasis. Then he says, now this is the last part we're going to discuss today. He says, وَالدَّلِيلُ التَّخْسِيسِ نَوْعَانِ. So this takhsees, this evidence that we use to extract some of the parts of the am, is of two types. نوعان, two types. muttasil, number one, or munfasil, number two. And remember, we mentioned that under muttasil comes three things, and under munfasil come three things, according to what the author has put. So he says here, al-muttasil is that which does not stand up by itself, i.e. it will be connected. It will be, muttasil means connected, so it will be connected to the am. And the munfasil is ma yastaqillu binafsih, is that which can stand by itself, like we saw an ayah that comes in a different surah and so on. It's not connected directly to the surah, it's not in the same sentence that it has to be there. So now he's going to explain each one. We mentioned under here, under this one, we mentioned three things. Under this one, we mentioned three things, right? Now the author, from then on, he's going to say al-awwal. So the first, so it says فَمِنَ الْمُخَصِّصِ الْمُتَّصِلِ, the first one, al-istithna, which is what I mentioned to you. And then after that, after he discusses al-istithna and the shurut of it, the conditions of istithna, when can you do it, when can you not do it, then he's going to mention thaniyan, the second one is ash-shart, the condition. Then he's going to mention the third one. I went past it. The third one is as-sifa, which is what we mentioned, the characteristic. Then he's going to say al-mukhasis al-munfasil. Al-mukhasis, the second type that of restrictor, or of a specifier, sorry, is al-munfasil. Okay, al-munfasil, al-mukhasis al-munfasil, ma yastaqillu bi nafsi, is that which can stand in of itself. And he says وَهُوَ ثَلَاثَةُ أَشْيَاء الْحِسْ وَالْعَقْلِ وَالشَّرْعِ. And he's going to discuss them here, inshallah. And this is the thing that we're going to read, which is kind of a point to ponder or think about. And then inshallah that will finish. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.